Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things antibacterial, because we're going to talk about the adventure Infected. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, please do. As of right now, we have one email in the hopper. We're saving that for the live show.
Better be a banging email, because so far...
It is not long enough for us to fill an entire hour with discussion about it.
That's going to be hard.
It's also an email from someone who's only on like episode 70 and said, hey, If you answer this, let me know so I can jump ahead to the episode that you answer it in.
It'd be 210 or something like that. Anyway, so otherwise, folks, if you don't want to know how we fill an hour of talk time, give us some questions, because we'll bore you to tears. We'll figure something out.
What I will be doing is starting to think about topics that can be brought up, and people in the chat will often ask questions and have stuff like that as well.
But they're only 15 minutes worth of time, so...
Anyway.
Exactly.
Infected.
Oh, totally. I have run this one time before. That's it. But this is written by the indomitable Robin Laws.
Yes. Honestly, I think this is probably my favorite of the official adventures.
Fair.
Blades is a close second because of how well it models a campaign arc based around magic items.
Yeah.
I kind of like Shattered Pattern, but
Chef's Kiss.
Infected, Blades, Shattered Pattern, like those would be my top three.
Fair.
I will be fair. I like all of them, but if we're talking about the standalone books, and I kind of consider Blades standalone, even though it's a bunch of short adventures, they all kind of follow an arc.
Yeah.
Then Infected is the top one.
So Blades is like a year of TV. It's episodic, but there's an overarching story.
Yeah.
Fair.
There are aspects of Blades that I think can be awkward, and we'll talk about those when we get there.
When we get there.
But Infected, I really, really like. First off, let's talk about this cover. For those of you who were not here, Dan and I spent about half an hour before we started recording talking about art. Talking about Earthdawn art and artists and such, because one of the side projects that I do with one of the many hats that I wear for FASA is going through the PDFs of the original first edition books and pulling out the art so that it could be used, for example, in the Legends of Barsave Adventures, so we don't have to commission new art for those smaller projects that don't really have an art budget. It also lets me do like the collage covers for those that I've put together for the last few of them.
Yeah.
But part of what I do with that is not only clip the art, but I also label who the artist is so that when we use a piece, we can make sure that they get credited in the front.
Yes.
And it is nice that the FASA artists in both Earthdawn and Shadowrun from back in the 90s, almost all of them had very distinctive styles.
Oh, yeah.
People may argue about whose styles they like more, or may not have something that's to their particular liking. But for the most part, all of the art is very evocative and very distinctive in the style, and I like how there is a wide variety of styles to be found. Yes. Whether you've got the clean lines and more traditional, for lack of a better term, fantasy art style of somebody like a Steve Bryant or
Jim Nelson.
Then you get into sort of the more geometric stuff of like a Mike Nielsen.
Yep.
Or
Tom Baxa.
The almost pointillism of Janet Alessio.
Oh, yes.
The absolutely distinctive character that Jeff Lobenstein brings to his figures.
Always.
Even some of the early stuff like Jack Hayes, like Earl Geyer.
Joel
Bisk, who is still around and did some work for more recent books.
Yeah.
Or like the incredible, almost ink wash of Larry McDougall.
Yeah.
Just an incredible array of talent. And there are occasionally times where I'm not sure who did a piece because they're not an artist that did a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And they didn't sign it in a way that is visible. A lot of the artists also signed enough of their pieces that you can pick out their style.
Agreed.
Anyway, we were talking about this cover because we were talking about art.
Yes. The infected cover.
Yep, by Tony Zudlo.
Oh, yeah.
Who is another, like, incredibly distinctive style. This is a little bit of a slightly unusual piece for Tony, I think.
Yeah.
The characters, particularly the central figure of Moltaa, who we will talk about more later, is very Tony. The atmosphere and mood is pretty in his style. But we've got a couple of aspects of this cover that are not what you typically see from him, certainly not in his black and white art.
Yeah.
Or even usually in his color pieces. But that is Aardelea in the front, and who we assume is probably Ardelia's mother, that's on the
front and center.
Right side of the picture as you're looking at it with the sword to her throat. Those feel like almost portraits of actual people. And it's not uncommon for artists to use figure references, and sometimes in an action scene or pose like this, to actually have pictures of people taking the pose so that they can get the proportions and all that stuff correct. But the thing that I want to know is that Tony's dog on the left-hand side. Is that a picture of Tony's golden retriever puppy?
Well, yeah, because this is 1990 something or other. So was this Tony's dog? This dog has certainly passed on by now, if it was a life model.
Yeah.
And then I want to know whose cat it was, too.
I think it was probably a life model because Tony's style normally doesn't lean that way.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, it is a dramatic cover.
Oh, yes.
It definitely draws you in terms of, like, wondering what's going on. You've got this magical thing going on. You've got this sort of dramatic typeface.
Yeah.
Terror in the Skies has a pretty evocative cover. I think this one is even more so. You want to know what's going on.
Yeah, there's 6 figures here. He worked in all 6 figures. 2 are in the background, very dark, very brooding. One kind of peering in. Moltaa, as you said, at the very front and center here, casting this magical spell with his orb and his rings of magic around Aardelea. Her mother, of course, is reaching for her, held hostage by, I can't say a goon, but an orc.
Well, I think that's probably likely to be Kwamm.
I think you're right. I couldn't put names on anybody.
Because I think Kwamm is the only orc among the...
Rings a bell.
We'll get to that. Anyway.
Yes.
That's the cover. Great cover.
Great cover. The texture on the obsidian skin, the detail work in the armor on the orc, fantastic. The fact that the orc is not green-skinned, I think, is also done incredibly well. So just the range is there. So real as well. And then the fact that the figures of the women on the cover are almost, they're painted like they're Boris Vallejo or Julie Bell.
Yeah, in terms
that
of being
kind of color
like
scheme and almost
portrait.
photoreal. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're the only non-fantasy parts there, but I just, the whole setting and the fact that you're in this, I can't say tent, but this interior structure with very interesting light. Fantastic cover. One of the best ever. No lie.
There are a lot of good covers in the Earthdawn line.
Yes, there
I mean, just in general, again, 90s era FASA had fantastic art.
Had it going on.
Part of the reason that they did that was that they had the ability of having in-house artists.
Yeah.
That would just do stuff and sometimes would just make drawings and stuff. And I think Lou talked about this or has it at some point in the past. Yeah, they would do art and we would see that and go, oh, that's cool. What can we work this into?
Yeah.
Let me make, that's a cool looking creature. Let me make up what it is.
Stats on that. Yeah.
Where it wasn't always we come up with a thing and now you have to draw it. Sometimes they draw it and now we have to come up with what it is.
Which I've read an interview. Monty Cook Games does the exact same thing for their science fantasy line. So kind of the same thing. It's still going on today, that practice.
Yeah. If I'm talking about distinctive FASA era covers, this is up there with Portfolio of a Dragon from Shadowrun.
Oh, yeah. Fair.
That just big...
Dunkles on face.
Dunkles on face.
Yeah.
It is not as dramatic. I mean, it's dramatic in its own way. It is not as sort of... But anyway, that is a very distinctive cover.
There's not as much story going on in that cover as there is in this cover. However, that is like the Mona Lisa. The more you look at it, the more stuff you notice with that Dunkelzahn face. The longer you stare at it, the more you're going to see.
So, anyway. Infected.
So those are 10 minutes about art.
Yeah. Where were we? I really like this adventure, in part because of how open-ended the resolution can be.
Yeah.
How when you get to the destination, you're just given a situation and it presents you with a couple of different ways that you can go about it. It thinks about the most common things that groups are likely to try.
Yeah.
And does its best to address them, but ultimately does not present a predetermined solution the way that, say, the previous two adventures that we've talked about have.
Yeah.
Where they're a little bit more on rails and you get to the end point and you have the final conflict, and that there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of how that comes out. But broadly speaking, okay, and our resolution is going to be, and then you fight the horror.
Yeah.
I also like how we've had two adventures that leaned into the idea of the horrors as antagonists, as the main driving force behind the story of what's going on there in some regard.
Yeah.
And then you have this one, which initially sort of presents itself in that regard, but twists it.
Totally. No, you're right. This thing starts off a little railroady because it has to be. You have to get from one point to another. That's the railroad part. Once you're there, it becomes a choose your own resolution. So kind of choose your. You can go down this path. It literally lays out 4 options. If the player characters do this, or this, A, B, C, or D, then you've got suggestions and what to do with those characters and the resolution thereof. So it really is railroady until it branches out to go, now you choose your own adventure, which is, the first time I had encountered that in a published adventure for me. So it was really kind of cool. Like I said, I've only run this once, but the whole thing starts off with a very prologue story, a faraway silence, Robin Laws, always good. And here's the encapsulation of the plot. Charboya is a trader in Bartertown who made his fortune and often sends letters and occasional goods back home to his town, to his little tiny village called Hanto. 8 months ago, Aardelea began to exhibit magical powers, and this group we've talked about before, the Grim Legion, learned of this, how is irrelevant, and has now overtaken Hanto and placed it under quarantine. And we're not talking COVID quarantine, we're talking Berlin Wall quarantine.
Yes. Because of these strange powers that this girl is exhibiting.
Yep.
The leader of this particular group of the Grim Legion is convinced that there is a horror involved in this in some capacity, and is trying to get to the bottom of it so that the horror can be defeated, so that the infection, as it were, can be dealt with.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of that is not anything that the player characters are aware of to start off.
No, not a bit.
All that they know is that they are hired by Charboya to travel to Hanto to deliver some letters and to possibly find out what's going on.
Yeah, what happened to the last messengers and...
Yeah. The last messengers thing is kind of a side quest. If you find out what happened to them, that's great. There have probably been times in the past where he has hired people to do this and they've just kind of skipped with the money.
Yep.
Or something along those lines. But it's, I want you to deliver these letters. I haven't heard from them in a while. Make sure everything's okay and come back and report to me.
Yeah.
That's the job. Pretty straightforward. It is a travel log in a way, in that it's going to be a journey of several days to get there. And there are encounters and things that happen along the road. We'll get into the specifics of those shortly. But that's what gets presented to the group. And any kind of research or questioning finds that Charboya is on the up and up, He's got a pretty decent reputation. This is something that people are sort of aware that he does every now and then. And your group is just sort of the latest band of adepts that he has hired to do this. Take some money back home, deliver some letters, find out what's going on, come back, because it has been a little bit unusual. It has been so long since he has heard anything from them.
Yeah, he usually just does like regular monthly, bi-monthly intervals, and this has been a while. So I broke down the entire plot into like 10 different steps because we did the last book kind of the same way. So this is going to help out, flesh things out a little bit. So number 1, Charboya hires you. You can talk to some previous couriers who've worked for him before, see if he's on the up and up. Get some background on that if you want to. Some ROLE playing, that can happen. Step 2, you're on the road to Hanto. Now, I appreciate this as well. It breaks down to 9 days riding if you get horses, 15 days walking if you don't. So it tells you how long to do this. So if you're one of those resource management game masters or players, how long do you have provisions and or hunting tests and so forth and so on? You can hand wave that if you want to, knock yourself out. But it also does bring up something that hasn't been used very much, which is Shantaya's Sextant on how to travel with the map from the Bar Safe box set.
Yeah, this is something that was in the Bar Safe box set. This was a way to navigate from place to place using this fantasy navigation aid.
Yeah.
On the map of Bar Safe that was included in the box set.
Big, colorful, beautiful map.
Yeah, it was like a neat little tool. Consisted of 2 parts. There was this sort of circular disc that had little arrows sticking out of it at irregular intervals, each of which with a little like symbol on them.
Yes. Yeah.
Some kind of like glyphs or other iconography. And then the other part is this straight edge arm that has a distance marked on it, basically.
It looks like a pointed ruler.
Yeah. Days walking on one side and days riding on the other. And the idea is that you center the disc on a particular location. You line up one of the notches with one of the passion constellations that is around the outside of the map.
Yeah, borders. Yeah.
Yeah, around the border of the map with like Thestonius at sunset, midnight, and sunrise. Because obviously they move there at different points in the sky at different times of the night.
Yeah.
And then you put the straight edge, line that up on another notch. And then you just trace a line, and at X distance, so many days walking or riding, you put where it is. And I think part of the thought of this, and I think it's really cool, was that this was something that would allow FASA, as they introduced new locations, like the village of Hanto, to have them be something that is placeable on the map after the map had actually been printed and released, and also potentially allow for GMs to place their own and provide directions and that sort of thing. There were directions to the major cities, I think, that were in the Bar Safe box set.
Yeah. And
there was this one here, but I don't recall that it ever really got used again.
I don't recall, but memory sucks.
If we come across it, we'll note that. But I think this is the only time that this really shows up in an adventure, and I suspect that this was an adventure that was probably in development very shortly after that box set came out.
Agreed.
So that it was something that was like kind of in the forefront of things.
I'm
probably
sure
not
Lou
at the
will
same
tell us.
time, but probably not long after.
Yeah. I'm sure Lou will fill us in on that one when he listens to
That's
this.
a possibility.
Hi, Lou. So step number 2, you rode to Hanto, riding and walking. You use the Sextant if you want to. You come across some other settlements and villages and some random encounters. So this is where you flesh out some kind of preamble for your group to get them, A, used to playing again if you have a long break, or getting used to the rules again if you want to do so, or some ROLE playing, or maybe a random combat adventure just to spice things up a little bit on the way. So this is where game masters get to fill in what they want to have before you get to the main plot.
this is even a place where you could develop your own secondary adventures that happen on the way to Hanto. There is kind of an example of one of them on the way, which is the chapter entitled Friends Indeed, aka the Yellowspring and Cherrypit dispute.
Yeah, that's actually number 3. And the negotiations they're in. So this lets you practice your negotiation powers before you get to the main plot.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's really neat because this conflict, this encounter, is a little bit of a thematic foreshadowing to what is going to happen later. It is a situation that doesn't have a simple, clear-cut, black and white solution to it. This isn't a come across a village that is being plagued by monster attacks from this forgotten care, and we just need to go and hack up some cadaver men.
Yeah, and it's over.
These two villages are kind of at odds with each other, and the player characters need to navigate this. Again, there is no clear solution. Here's the situation. Here's what these different people will tell you. And then you need to decide what you're going to do. And that could be, we're going to wash our hands of this whole mess and just go away. That is one possibility.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, you could end up allying with one or the other. It's not quite a Hatfields and McCoy situation.
No.
But it is very clearly the individuals involved have agendas, and you need to navigate that and figure out what's going on and find the best way to a solution that you can, and recognize that there are quite a number of shades of gray and difficult things to deal with out here in the wilds.
So I agree.
Yeah.
This is a thematic foreshadowing to not everything is going to be take out your sword and kill it.
Yeah. Not everything is going to be straightforward and clear cut. And it may behoove you to investigate and talk to people to figure out what's going on before you decide what to do about it.
Yeah. And this gives fantastic characterizations, some lovely different character snippets to go along with as well. Rumor mills that are great. So you can hear different things, and a little bit of detective work. You got to not just let the spoon feed the player characters. They need to do some investigative work and ask some questions. And so you're getting a lot of buy-in from the players along the way. So a lot of ROLE playing as well. So plenty of this. So you've done 3. Number 4, you are attacked by the last messengers Charboya sent. You know, a small little ambush. And you can interrogate them if you'd like to, if they're not dead. So you can glean some info on Hanto, the town,
and what you're going to be riding into in the near future. If you can get a little bit of intelligence and knowledge about the situation that's going on there, and find out why it is that they didn't return. And that was that they kind of got their butts kicked and are just scrabbling to survive. Given the circumstances that this ambush fight takes place, it can be pretty rough because it happens at night. There's an archer that is there's a couple of archers actually that are at range along with the wizard. So the group needs to sort of close the distance to them in order to deal with them. And hopefully, again, decide to perform some degree of restraint in terms of just not cutting them all down. Yeah. If they had done some research and talked to folks back in Bartertown, there's actually some clues that they could have about who these people are. Yeah. Again, this is an adventure that overall rewards forethought and investigation and talking to people. While the first stretch is kind of on rails because you leave Bartertown, you get to Hanto. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can kind of happen on the way, but it all, again, plays into really strong themes of being careful and not being just
hack and slash.
Cut everything that opposes you down and maybe think about questions in the aftermath of that. The main question being, how much loot do they have? Yes. It is not a hack and slashy kind of adventure. Not that the earlier ones were. No. but this one is a lot more cerebral.
Yes, and social.
And social in that it rewards that kind of stuff. It is absolutely possible for a group that is not inclined towards introspection to just kind of be like, okay, we're going to kind of cut our way through everything and shrug and collect our paycheck and go home.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really good in that regard.
Agreed. So that's the first 4 steps out of the 10. Number 5, you finally get to Hanto. As you're halfway through the plot points, the 10 that I've found out here. Number 5, you finally get to the town and you see what the Grim Legion and the village is like. And this is where we get to do the big reveal on the Grim Legion. They're using cadaver men as sentries and guards.
Those cadaver men being a couple of the members of the previous courier group.
Messenger. Yes.
And also that there is a wall that has been constructed and a guard tower is under construction.
Yep.
And we meet the principals of the Grim Legion group. The leader of them being Moltaa, an Obsidian Nethermancer.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kwamm, who is an orc swordmaster.
Yeah.
Both of whom are 6th circle, I believe. They're journeyman.
Something like that.
Tier. As well as, I think there's probably another 4 or 5 members of the Grim Legion group.
Yes.
Between 2nd and 4th circle, I think is what they are.
Yeah.
And they are all given write-ups and personalities and stuff that's included because that all potentially becomes important in the situation that unfolds there. The basic idea is the group is told the village is under quarantine because of suspected horror taint.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to let you in. Although if they are able to persuade their way in, they are told that they will not be allowed to leave because they don't want to risk the horror taint getting out. And so that's kind of the situation. At that point, it's, okay, what do you do?
Exactly. This is where it begins to branch off into your decisions are going to drive the narrative.
Right. It's possible that a more aggressive or fight-first group could potentially try and take on the Grim Legion.
Mm-hmm.
And the Grim Legion largely doesn't have a lot of interest in killing them, but will beat them up. And Moltaa is a little bit of a laser focus on the horror taint.
Yeah.
And if you are coming here and you are trying to disrupt her efforts to stomp out this problem, then we're going to deal with you, throw you in a cell, essentially.
Yeah.
Because clearly you're doing this to try and break the quarantine. Perhaps you are servants of the horror that is trying to get out.
Yeah, Moltaa is the hammer. Everything else to her is a nail.
Right. And then Kwamm likes the idea of establishing Hanto as a fort or base of operations for him to start being a petty little tyrant and start exerting his control through the area under the aegis of we're just protecting people from the horrors. And if you don't like it, well, you must be in line with the horror. The classic opportunist that is looking to pursue his own
Twisted
power
logic.
and edification over the actual purpose that Moltaa is kind of leading this group under.
And they both use their own twisted logic to justify whatever they want to do.
Right. Ultimately, Moltaa is interested in the truth.
Yes.
It's just that she has... I've always sort of identified or felt that Moltaa identified as female.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the case, but that's always the way that I pictured it. While she is ultimately interested in the truth, she has a rather narrow focus and has a foregone conclusion that is in her mind and believes that it is just a matter of time before the truth of her conviction is revealed. That she can't possibly be wrong about what's going on. And so it's now just a matter of this child that is the pawn of a horror, and all of these villagers who are taken in by her apparent innocence and whatnot. Once I reveal the truth to them,
yeah,
all will be revealed and will be good. It is very conceivable to think of a different individual in charge of this who would come in and say, strange powers, it's a horror, stab, and going on.
Yes.
Moltaa does have interest in getting to the bottom of it, not necessarily to find out the truth, but to find out what the horror is, where it is.
Yeah.
To be able to track down the source of this stuff.
Yeah, working back upstream on this problem, other than just killing this person, that's it, on to the next. They want to trace this line back and defeat it at the source. You know, I applaud that decision. So it's not a it's not a one-dimensional character. Robin Laws doesn't do one-dimensional characters. So this has more depth and character behind it. And I appreciate all the writing going on in this adventure. So that's just through step 6. Step 7, you finally get to meet Aardelea and her mother, Aardelea. And Ardelia's powers are developing where she can actually begin moving things with her mind. And you find out that there's a cavern outside the village of Hanto with a book to find if you're so interested in finding it. So this involves a little spelunking and some falling damage, by the way.
That is something that is eventually revealed as part of the interactions and investigation and role-playing with the various personalities that are in this location.
Yeah.
Not only Aardelea and her mother, both of whom are pretty reluctant at first to reveal any information because of what has been going on, but also the other villagers. Mm-hmm. We've got the members of the Grim Legion, not only Moltaa and Kwamm, but the other 4, I think there are. All of them are lower circle. There's Loar, he's a human warrior. Gazoog is he's an orc warrior, so he's older. Mm-hmm. There's an old elf beastmaster who is low circle because she went out to sort of start adventuring now that her children are grown and out on their own, and she was kind of like bored. Grandmother needs something to do. And then you've got the young thief. Mm-hmm. And again, these characters are given personalities and motivations, and there is a real sense that if the player characters take time and talk to people and build relationships and maybe build trust in certain ways, they can find out from Aardelea information that was not being given to Moltaa because of how intimidating and hammer to anvil
the methods that Moltaa was using.
Yeah, that are being presented here. Again, having decided what the situation is, now it's a matter of finding the evidence that can be used to prove what's going on.
Yeah.
And possibly through an understanding that you're not likely to be able to punch your way out of the situation when all is said and done.
Yes.
Maybe taking advantage of the personalities of the Grim Legion to sow dissent and divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Now, this is all made more difficult by the fact that in order to gather a lot of this information, you need to get into the village, which means it's going to be difficult to get back out in order to head to the cave that you eventually learn about, that Aardelea says was where she found the thing that started her powers to manifest. The most common story that I hear about this adventure is how often it is that groups will either split up, sending some inside the village and leaving some outside.
Yeah.
Or groups with windlings have a much easier time. Because while the fence that has been built around the village has like bells on it to alert if somebody's trying to break the quarantine, windlings can just fly over it.
Yes.
And that is one thing that I probably like the one weakness of this adventure is that I don't really see anywhere that is addressed in the adventure, is how the Grim Legion will deal with windlings, because there aren't any windlings that live in the village.
Yep.
They don't have any windlings among their own number, but windlings can very easily, in theory, break the quarantine. I imagine that if a windling went into the village voluntarily, there's a lot of awkward stuff that can happen. But the idea is that in some capacity, somebody or multiple people head out to the place where the book was found, do a little bit of spelunking, find the book and the other items that are there in the cave, bring them back and use them to reveal to Moltaa that it's not a horror. It's something else that we don't really understand, but it's not a horror. Moltaa will maybe take a little bit of convincing, but with actual evidence, is willing to concede the situation and, all right, well, let's pack up and go find some actual horrors to fight. But Kwamm is not thrilled with the idea of doing that because he wants his little fiefdom.
Yes. So this is where we get to, so point number 8 was the cavern and finding the book. Number 9, this is where it really does branch out. You've already had the first branch. So this is the two to three different ways you can take this adventure. Right here is really where it gets into the pick a plot, choose your own adventure, everything-a-thon type resolution. You can either convince the Grim Legion, you can jailbreak Aardelea and Orwea, and everybody else you want to. You can revolt and overtake the Legion if you think you got the arms to do so. You can play politics within the Legion if you really want to play the long game and do the very long convincing and all that entails. Or you can just kill Aardelea, which is not very heroic, but it is an option. So there's 5 options right there. And the adventure as written gives you resolution help on all 5 of those options.
These are the most likely approaches that groups can take to resolve the situation in Hanto.
Yeah.
And here is how it gets dealt with. If the group is unsuited in some way to resolve it in any other capacity, then, it may be that killing Aardelea is the only way to kind of resolve the situation and lift the quarantine, which is not particularly heroic.
No.
Gets them a bad reputation.
Yeah. And is just not helpful.
This is an option. And again, there's a number of different ways that this can happen. You don't even necessarily need to find the book in order to resolve this.
No, you don't.
It could be that you go in, either you can convince Moltaa without any actual evidence, which is difficult, but you could potentially do. There's if Aardelea is the problem, let's sneak Aardelea out and her mother, let's stage a jailbreak. And when they realize that they're gone, they will leave the village alone. We'll run to Bartertown, hopefully that Charboya will be able to do something to help out in this situation. Or head somewhere else. Who knows? We don't know. But let's get them out of the village and resolve the situation in the village that way. Let's get the villagers to rise up and rebel against the Grim Legion here. And that is going to hurt some people and cause some lives, maybe a way to resolve it. Or do that divide and conquer kind of situation. Again, the only one of those that really requires the book to be found is convincing Moltaa, because that's very convincing evidence.
Yes, it's overwhelming evidence.
And so it's very open-ended. Here's a situation, how are you going to resolve it? And there's no predetermined situation.
No.
And it even mentions in troubleshooting is that the players may be creative and come up with something else that I didn't think of, so good luck.
Go for it. Yeah. So be prepared for all of it. Because by point number 10, because we're there now, this is the loose ends. Depending on how your party decided to resolve those 5 or 6 options, this is where you get to so this is where your game master preparation needs to come into play. You need to know all your characters. You need to know all the comings and goings of everybody out there as well. Were they a split party? Were they not a split party? Did they all stay inside and jailbreak out and then come back? How did all of this happen? So this is where your game master prep needs to be finalized before you get to this stage of the adventure.
In this loose ends bit, the situation has been resolved in some capacity.
Yes.
Now what do you do? Mm-hmm. What is the aftermath that you are needing to deal with here?
Yeah.
Ultimately, is it a good ending or is it a bad ending?
Yes.
Things went badly. Mm-hmm. You could have dead villagers and ruin. Ugh, this was a bad situation, but we've got to go and report what happened. Yeah. But the other key point of all of this is that you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody else who's going to help. You need to figure this out on your own.
Yes.
And whatever the result is what you've got to deal with. Mm-hmm. I really, really like that. Again, we kind of talked about that back at the beginning.
Yeah, this really does enforce the player agency. You get to rely on your skills, you get to rely on your talents, you get to rely on your ROLE playing as well with your character and how they interact with all of the NPCs. And this is written for second, third, or fourth circles. So they want you to have some experience before you get on this one. So it's not for brand newbies. You've done something else before this. This is like the second or third adventure you get to. So come prepared. If you think you know what's going on Earth Dawn, this is the next one that'll take you a little bit sideways because it's only the first half is railroady. Everything after that is entirely player agency.
There are a total of 8 members of the Grim Legion.
Yeah.
Which, again, given that number of characters and the obvious power that Moltaa and Kwamm wield.
Yeah, 6th circle each.
A group, even the 6 to 8 characters that are recommended for this, will have a hard time dealing with this in a very straightforward, well, let's just go in and kill them all situation. Fighting the Grim Legion should be kind of made clear that that's not the best option.
Yeah.
Or it's the option that is most likely to end up with you being severely injured and possibly killed. It's an option. You can do that. There is a very free-form, open-ended thing here that is just really, really refreshing in some ways to see in a pre-written published adventure. It is difficult to set things up with the variety of resolution methods that you see in this. This is actually a great example of the create a situation, not a story.
Yes. This is very, very well done. And not to leave this out at the end, but we also have a few treasures that can be found. Because we've talked about treasures in the past before. So you get the option to find, take away, acquire Dorita's silk-tailed whaler sword, the skull of Marburg. I guarantee I handed out to somebody because I took it from Moltaa. A dragon statue, and of course, the book.
Yes.
So
the problem with the book is that barring some kind of clever way of preserving it, it doesn't last. It's too old. It was kept in the condition it was because of the cave that it was in. And once you bring it out into a more open environment, it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, turns to dust within like a week. So it doesn't take a year to get there. It doesn't take long.
There is magic that could potentially be used creatively to keep it from completely disintegrating.
But you'd have a week, and you're only second, third, or fourth circle tops, maybe, if you're doing it right. Good luck pulling that one off.
And so, while the sword and the skull of Marburg may or may not end up in player characters' hands, depending on the exact resolution of things at the end.
Yeah.
The book and what has happened to Aardelea ends up being a thread that is carried forward in a few places in later source books.
Yeah.
There are a couple of adventure hooks, certainly one in the Thrall source book that ties into the Aardelea storyline. She, of course, factors very largely in one of the arcs in Prelude to War.
Yes.
But then the other one, the dragon statue, which is something that is a mystery. There's not really much that the group can learn about it, but it likewise is something that factors in to things later on. in an indirect way. It's kind of like the idea is presumably the characters are going to maybe investigate it to a certain extent, but not really be able to find anything out about it. And presumably it will leave their hands in some capacity.
Yeah.
They'll sell it, or again, if you're kind of following the published adventures arc, this ties into Lou's excellent adventure, aka Shattered Pattern.
Yeah.
Because it ties into everything that's going on there. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that later. Here's a little mysterious MacGuffin thing that's not important or really connected into this adventure at all, except as a possible clue to the origin of stuff that's going on here, but it's just kind of loot. It's this thing you find, and it's mysterious, and you aren't able to find much out about it. And so, there you go.
Yeah, fair. It also has some wonderful handouts at the back that actually look like scrolls you can print up. It's got nice maps to use. I remember taking the map and putting it in one of those gigantic 3-foot wide industrial blotters. And so I made this map literally 3 feet by 3 feet, and it had little figurines I could move around on the map because it did come to combat when I ran this one.
Yeah.
And absolutely no one is surprised.
The maps in this follow the tradition of most of the maps in Earth Dawn, which is to say that they are not gridded
battle maps, no.
D&D style battle maps.
Yeah, not hex maps.
Or hex maps or anything like that. They are a map that kind of shows the layout of the area, and you need to deal with things beyond that. The map to Hanto that is given by Charboya at the beginning of the adventure is authentic to the kind of ways that maps are likely to be in this setting.
Yeah.
They're not the excellent satellite imagery. Here are the major landmarks, and here's the way that you go, and when you get close to the area, you just need to figure out what's what.
Yeah, totally. So I like that all of the handouts are in setting handouts. They're nice scroll work. They're very florid typeface used on those as well. The maps are hand drawn. It all looks perfect. Really, one of my favorite adventures I've ever run. And I think, since we have mentioned in the past, steal where you can. If you're running a different game, and it could be Shadowrun, it could be D&D, it could be any number of games, take the plot and the characters from this one and tweak it to that setting. It's not a bad introductory game to run for any game you're doing. This is when I would definitely steal.
Yeah. Even if you don't necessarily steal more directly, the setup and the situation and everything that goes on with this is really almost a masterclass in an adventure as location and problem rather than plot.
Yeah.
The plot is sort of what happens based on the character's actions. It's not something that's predetermined. And just really, really good. Again, of the published Earth Dawn adventures, probably my favorite. It certainly ranks in the top 3.
Fair enough. Having run this one only one time, I dug every part of it, and I used
I think I've only actually run it... I might have run it twice. It's possible I ran it twice. I know I've run it at least once. It's possible that I've run it twice. But I don't think any more than that.
Fair enough. I ran Mist Betrayal twice. I ran Tear in the Skies twice. No, I ran it... Either way, I've been through that one. I ran it once and played it once, so it was fine. Infected, I ran once. This one has... Of the ones I've run, this one I think has more of my table stories than most involved in this one, because it was...
This is an adventure that generates a lot of table stories, in part because of how varied the ending can be.
Yes.
Everybody will have stories about, this is how we resolved the situation.
Uh-huh.
Whereas Terror in the Skies and Mists of Betrayal, they will have stories associated with them, but they don't necessarily get shared quite as much, I don't think, because there's not as much variety in terms of how the resolution can go. In fact, let's wrap up with this. If you have run this adventure...
Love it.
Send in to us, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Tell us the story about how your group resolved the situation. Was there anything that particularly stood out or that you thought was especially notable or amusing? in terms of how your group encountered the situation and how they dealt with it. I would love to hear those table stories from people.
You know what? I think we could fill the hour at FredoniaCon with every single version of the ending of Infected that we get.
Possibly.
We could do live readings of those. I would love that.
But there we go. That is my challenge to you folks out there. If you have run or played in this adventure, send us an email, tell us how it went, share those stories. Because this is one that really generates a wide and amusing and fascinating variety of them.
Absolutely. So until next time, folks, go break the quarantine on Infected for your legend.
Good night, everybody.